everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we're really excited. We are covering the AP Top 25 poll yet again in this video, and there's a lot of big games this week that really changed the complexion of college football, especially some of the top teams. So make sure you stick around through this entire video, hit that like button, and also subscribe for more content just like this. We also have NFL Pick'em and Predictions that comes out on Monday every single week, and we have a lot of other fun videos on the channel. So make sure you guys stick around to check out all of that content. And now jumping into it, Austin, here, the others receiving votes category, one that we talk about pretty much every video, but there's a few teams in here that you specifically really want to talk about right now. What teams are they, and what did you think about them this weekend?
I just want to talk a little bit about Texas. That Texas-Oklahoma State game was a great one to watch. You saw Spencer Sanders struggle a little bit against Texas's defense at times. And then there were times where, they were able to work their way back into the game. Quinn Ewers up and down, afternoon. I think that this Texas team is just very, very close to being, competitive and being ranked once again. But, just narrowly losing to Oklahoma State, who's a very, very good program. Mike Gundy's done a terrific job with this team, but Texas is very close. They got a lot of talent on the roster. Obviously, Robinson is a guy. Quinn Ewers, there's a number of NFL level talents on this team, but they just have to, piece it together a little bit more. I think had they won that Alabama game, this is a whole different conversation. I think there's a different confidence level with this program. Another team I want to talk about quickly, Mississippi State. They went up against Alabama. They weren't as competitive as I thought they were going to be honest with you. This is a high potent offense, and they barely could put up any points this week. I was a little bit surprised. Even against Alabama's defense, I felt they were going to put up a little bit better of a fight. Mike Leach in this program, they're geared towards offense. So they needed a lot better of an offensive output to, have them any higher than they currently are.
Right. And also UTSA, shout out to them. They received one vote. We do have a viewer who's a big UTSA fan, so hopefully he's watching right now. Shout out to you. You know who you are if you're watching. At 25 now, we also have South Carolina, the Gamecocks. There's a lot of recognizable names in that program. And then 24, NC State. Of course, they lost their last game to Syracuse, didn't really play this past weekend. So you're looking at these two teams here, two Carolina schools, Austin. What's really your thought process on where these two teams are? Obviously, one in the SEC, one in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, you look at South Carolina, this is a program that you felt we're going to elevate a little bit with Spencer Rattler. Now, this is a big win against Texas A&M. They were at home, definitely giving them that advantage, but Texas A&M is one of the most talented programs in the entire nation, led by, one of the better recruiters in the entire nation in Jimbo Fisher, but they haven't been able to put it together this week or this year, holistically speaking. But Texas A&M is a team that, has had a hard time putting all that talent and making it mesh. South Carolina takes advantage, and then North Carolina State, they drop a spot here just due to all the other games around them.
Right. A few teams move up, and we'll look at some of those teams here. Number 23, Tulane. We were pretty surprised to see them in the top 25 last week, and they even build on that with a win against Memphis. They now jump up 2 spots ahead of NC State, Austin, like you were talking about, going from 25 to 23. K-State drops down 5 spots. Obviously, their previous game was a loss to TCU. We see North Carolina jump up with a narrow, and I mean very narrow win over Duke. Cincinnati with a very narrow win over SMU. And then Kentucky here as well. You see their most recent game at that 5-2 record was that 10-point win over Mississippi State. Austin, in this grouping, what are some of the teams that you'd like to watch for moving up potentially, or maybe even moving out of the top 25 in coming weeks?
Yeah, I think one of the toughest teams to kind of evaluate where they're at currently is, Kentucky. I mean, I know, with having that void week, but Kentucky's a tough team to place because we've seen them in the top 10. We've seen them unranked. This Kentucky team's been all over the place. Cincinnati's another team. Luke Fickell's done a terrific job with this program. They're getting narrow wins, but, this is not a super strong conference as well. They lost a lot of talent to the NFL, therefore making it hard to peg what they truly are. Really good 6-1 record, but once again, this is a team, maybe they're just able to plug and play guys. I think with a somewhat inexperienced roster with a little bit of that turnover makes it tough. Kansas State in that Big 12 there, losing to TCU, who's been on an absolute tear. This is a tough competitive program, but once again, I think there are some limitations with this team.
Right. There's a lot of talent here between these teams. Like you said, though, Austin, some of these teams maybe not putting it together. Some of them still trying to figure out from some of the pieces they lost from last season. Obviously, Cincinnati is the headliner in that category. As we move up into the top 18 now, we got LSU here, who's really kind of changed the complexion of their season. Of course, things just did not look great at the start of the year. They had a pretty bad loss They beat Ole Miss here by 25 with a huge win. And one big thing here is the quarterback play. You guys have gotten a ton of running yards from your quarterback. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then 17, Illinois with the win over Minnesota in their most recent game as well. They're at 6-1 right now in the Big Ten. Not really sure that a lot of people expected Illinois to be one of the top teams in the Big Ten this year. And then Syracuse, kind of the team that came out of nowhere, had a big lead in that Clemson game, ended up blowing it. Clemson came back to win. Syracuse, they had a real chance to go 7-0. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the Orange as well.
Yeah, so a lot to cover with this grouping here. Syracuse, very competitive in that game, ended up blowing that lead, but I think Syracuse has proven that they are for real. They went up against a very, very talented roster in Clemson. This is not a team that we were expecting to hang in the AP Top 25. There's a lot of teams that dabble in it and then, quickly get kicked out of it. I think a lot of people were kind of expecting that with Syracuse because, historically speaking, Syracuse not being an elite program, especially more so in recent years. But a lot of credit to them in that program. Illinois having that void week, their last win coming against Minnesota. This is a tough running football team, hard nosed. Brent Bielema has done a great job with this team. And then once again, LSU led by Brian Kelly. Jane Daniels here looking at what he's been able to do. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. His ability to run the football, to get out in space. This is a guy that can do a lot of danger on the ground, but the biggest progression you've seen from him is him as a passer, really trusting his arm. And I think Brian Kelly has talked a lot to him about staying in the pocket, staying aware, not being one of those one read guys and then take off, which is what he was at the, early part of the season where they were definitely struggling offensively. So, Daniels, terrific job on the ground. I think LSU, once again, starting to return to relevance a little bit. They've struggled the last 2 seasons, but maybe this is the time where we start to see the tide change for them just a little bit. That was a huge monumental win against a very, very tough Ole Miss program.
Right. A really good statement win for them. Daniels, like you said, Austin, so dynamic, both with his legs and arm. He has 30 runs this year of over 10 plus yards. That is 12 more than any Power 5 QB at this point of the season. Moving up into the top 15 now, we've got Ole Miss here, and there they are dropping 8 spots after that loss to LSU, Austin, like we just talked about. That was a big collapse for them, and they were a team that they've been hovering around in that top 10 very consistently. At 14, we've got Utah, to 5-2 record. Their most recent game was that USC game that we've talked about already. Penn State, 6-1. They had a big win in their whiteout game. Chad Powers was in attendance to watch them kind of clap up the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Oregon beats UCLA, and UCLA falls 3 spots because of that. 15, pretty good. UCLA kind of falling here in the Pac-12. This really hurts the chance for a Pac-12 team to represent a team to be represented in the college football playoffs. And then Wake Forest, 6-1. I know you like Sam Hartman a lot. They had a nice win over Boston College by a pretty lofty score here. So what's your thoughts on 15-10?
Yeah, so nothing that really jumps out. I'm kind of shocked, honestly. Ole Miss fell below, like Utah, Penn State. I am a little shocked by that, just for the sheer fact that LSU is a good team, but maybe it's more so the manner that they had lost in. Once again, Utah was very, very close to going to 3 losses against USC. Nevertheless, they won that football game. Penn State continued to show out. You look at. There's a lot of different looks that Manny Diaz throws at you defensively that can really confuse an offense. And Minnesota was, out of sorts in that football game. They absolutely dominated a team who's been excellent on third down. They've been, excellent defensively, but Penn State was able to exploit a lot of different things, a lot of different playmakers on that Penn State offense. UCLA, DTR has been phenomenal for them this season. They lose to Oregon, talented program, but UCLA thought that they definitely had that game. But at the end of the day, like you had said, it's tough to imagine the Pac-12 being represented in that, college football playoff. There's so much good football being played across the country. Pac-12, they don't necessarily have that elite team. USC is their best shot at it, though.
I'm interested to hear what our viewers have to say about this 15 ranking with Ole Miss, like you talked about, Austin. Our viewers tend to think there's a heavy SEC bias. It's kind of weird that a 7-1 SEC team is below a 5-2 Pac-12 team, but we'll hear what our viewers have to say about that in the comment section. Now into the top 9 here. This is where it gets really, really close and competitive. There's USC, obviously. We've talked at length already about that Utah game where they lost by 1 point. Very close matchup. OK State here. You watch that game against Texas, like you said, and in depth, that game is really, really close. And Oklahoma State got the better of Texas by the end of it. Oregon with that win over UCLA, like we mentioned. TCU, their last game was a win against Kansas State. That moves them up to number 7 at a 7-0 record. What a turnaround for that program. And then Alabama, one of those teams that everyone talks about with that SEC bias. They are 7-1 themselves. Statement win over Mississippi State by 24 after everyone was starting to question what this Alabama program is. Nick Saban and the boys went out and got the business done here against Mississippi State. Austin, 10-6. Did they get it right? Should Alabama be higher? Where do you have some of these teams ranked?
Yeah, I mean Alabama, that's a tough evaluation because they've been seeming to drop some of these weird games during the regular season. We jump back to Texas A&M last year on the road. Alabama does not surprise me that they are still at 6 considering who is ahead of them. But if we look at an actual talent perspective, you can argue they are the best in the country, if not, maybe second in terms of actual talent on that roster. TCU has been doing wonders here. They've been great in Big 12 play. They've been winning games against quality opponents such as K-State, who is also a ranked opponent. Oregon as well. And once again, representing that Pac-12. So you got the USC and Oregon that are contending here. But once again, like we had previously stated, I just don't know if either of those teams have the firepower to shoot up into that, that top 4 in that college football playoff range. Oklahoma State, like we had spoke on earlier, though, they're a good team. Not a great team, but they're so sound defensively. Obviously the offense had to kind of carry this one a little bit, but there's a lot to love with this team as well. But I think they got it right for the most part in how they've ranked this section.
Austin, I've got an important question here for you about college football scheduling. And we see a lot of teams week 1 specifically take some really cupcake style games. Oregon chose to not do that this year. They played Georgia week 1 and got obliterated. They started in the top 10, quickly moved out of it after getting obliterated by Georgia. They've worked their way back in. Assuming they had, chosen a cupcake game for week 1, you could argue that they'd be 7-0 at this point, and maybe they'd be in the running for a college football playoff appearance here. Do you think it was a mistake for Oregon to play Georgia, or do you like the competitive nature of that game?
You have to give a lot of credit to Oregon for scheduling that kind of game because I think it shows that, they're battle tested. Once again, them losing to Georgia is tough, but it definitely hurts them in the rankings. You have to give respect to them, but the unfortunate reality is that, they're very likely would have been 7-0, but I think we're almost in that same spot here where they're in the TCU range. You know what I'm saying? I just think that Alabama probably still gets the nod over them. It's tough to crack that top 6 and eventual top 5, which we're about to get into.
Right, definitely. And as we go into that top 5, like you talked about here, shows how important every single week is in college football. Clemson at 8-0, they survived disaster here after nearly losing to Syracuse, come back and win that game. Really important for their standing right now. They're at number 5, and Michigan is up at number 4. Of course, no game this past week. Their previous game was against Penn State, though, where they won handedly in that one, Austin. With Clemson getting a win over another ranked top 25 team, do you think that they should be ahead of Michigan? What's your thoughts on those two programs?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, Clemson, Michigan, this is a big topic of conversation. When you look at what Michigan's done and the style they've done it, they deserve to be ahead of Clemson. Clemson's been in some games that, definitely are going to make you sweat. But you look at how good Penn State's been this year, and Michigan had absolutely dominated them when they had played. Michigan's for real. Normally, I'm not a huge fangirl of this program, but at the end of the day, they've looked great. I mean, defensively, they're good. Offensively, they can attack you in a lot of different ways. Clemson has the more talented roster per se. However, Michigan's just played a tougher style of football. Having to go into the big house, that's not an easy task for anybody.
Right. They've been able to pound on the ground specifically this year, having some huge monster running games as well. Definitely two teams that deserve to be in the top 5. And there's going to be a lot of conversation come college football playoff time about who deserves to be in and who doesn't. Now at number 3, we look at Tennessee here. They stay at that ranking with a huge win over Tennessee Martin. Just one that wasn't competitive from the beginning of that game. Jalen Hyatt showed out again in the first half. I believe it was around 7 catches, 190 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he's playing himself into a round 1 receiver, it seems like at this point, at least based on production. Ohio State at number 2. Their most recent game was a 44-point win over Iowa. And then Georgia, of course, we talked already at length about them beating Vanderbilt by 55 points in, pretty convincing fashion here. Austin, the top 3, I've asked you every single video. Are they getting this right? Is there a legitimate argument for Ohio State to be 1 in the rankings?
I think after this past week, yes, I believe there is. Now, I've been all on the whole Georgia kick, but the thing that stands out to me here is Iowa's defense has been great, and we had spoke actually on Saturday about this. And they've been towards the top of a lot of the defensive rankings, defensive scoring, the actual yardage allowed, and they absolutely dominated that Iowa defense, and it wasn't even close. So Iowa or Ohio State has a really good argument to be there. However, it's tough when you're going up against comparing the resumes here against the national champions. And let's not forget that marquee win, that Georgia had earlier, like we spoke about, against Oregon. I think that Georgia is, the cream of the crop, what you are currently looking at right now. But Ohio State is not that far behind. Marvin Harrison Jr. is solidifying himself as one of the top receivers in the country. Jackson, Smith, and Jigba, another big name for them. And let's give a lot of credit to Tennessee. Tennessee has been rolling through opponents. This offense is clicking on all cylinders. This is a great top three. And honestly, you can have an argument for any of these three being number one.
Right. There's a lot of talent between these three programs. We see 2 SEC schools in the top 3, 1 Big Ten school. It seems like the SEC has been running things again here. Of course, a lot of people are going to talk about that SEC bias. I mean, Georgia goes out and beats some of the best teams from every other conference handedly. We'll see come college football playoff time if they can back that number 1 ranking. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel as well for more. We post this every single Sunday, so hopefully you guys do stick around for more of this. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.